I'm not sure of the economics in Indonesia, Murray, and why they are as they are, but certainly in the US, in Canada, and in Australia, new build coal is not competitive with solar. It's not competitive with wind, either onshore or offshore, on a straight LCOE basis, on a least cost of energy basis. It's already more expensive than renewables. So I don't know why, whether it's some things that aren't, whether it's cheaper labour costs or
and also the clean coal technology we haven't used.
Oh, so you're not using clean coal?
We are still using the cheapest ever
Okay.
coal production, so that's why the price still keep very low.
Yeah. There was a tender last week in Brazil, and there was a large solar plant that came in and tendered at 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And so that was the winning tender for a very large scale plant. No fossil fuel can compete with that.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you very much, and similarly from me, thank you very much to the Chair and the panel for a very stimulating discussion. I've got a couple of questions at least. I might just try to tie sort of one together for Sir Tim and Andrew. I'm perhaps sort of firstly, Sir Tim, I'd just be interested if you could sort of unpack the concept of democratic accountability a little bit more. Clearly that role for government, but what role does civil society play in an ex-ante democratic accountability process? What's that forum for engagement? How does that resolve? And perhaps sort of related to that, Andrew, I'm just thinking about the other policy devices, regulation, of course. In Australia, we have the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. I think your concern about the new mine in Australia suggests that we're lacking recognition of the emission benefit. So, is there a role for sort of a regulatory control on those types of projects that's missing at the moment?
Yeah, I think on the democratic accountability, what is crucial is information and freedom of information and a free press. In the case of Fergal, there was a real asymmetry in terms of information. The information was with the companies, the British companies, and on the British side. The NGOs knew nothing. They suspected something was going on, but they didn't have the resources to really investigate. It was only when the parliamentary investigations took place that the information all started coming out. In Malaysia, I mean, you couldn't expect the British press to get that involved until the dodgy arms deal became apparent. I mean, that's really what got the British press going, illegality. On the Malaysian side, well, the Malaysian press in modern times has not been a particularly free one, and exactly, there wasn't much accountability there. So I think information is key. You obviously have to have parliamentarians who are going to take an interest in these things. I'm actually quite involved in a British infrastructure project right now called High Speed 2, which is the largest infrastructure project Britain will have ever done. And even today, there's lack of accountability. Those of us who don't think this is a very sensible scheme have not been able to obtain the analyses which government has done that are really necessary for us to see what's going on.
Yeah, I think you raise a very good point. I want to talk about the civil society aspects, but also the government regulatory aspects. The most sinister thing I've seen in Australia in recent years is government attempts well, firstly, they defunded environmental defenders officers, that's the legal NGOs in each jurisdiction. Then they tried to pass new legislation that would make it illegal for any environment group, voluntary environment group, to protest against any project that was geographically removed from where it's, so only people whose own land was going to be directly affected were going to be allowed to protest. So basically, the conventional civil society protests of the sort that Greenpeace or others might mount would become illegal. Now, they haven't been able to get that through the Senate, but it remains on the table. So those types, and the other thing that makes it difficult for civil society is not being able to access any data, is the lack of transparency of information, which to me feeds into a flaw that we have around the governance of these multi-decadal tens or hundreds of billions of dollars projects, these very, very large projects, still get looked at in a project-by-project planning, approvals, governance framework. And yet projects of this size distort an economy. They distort labour markets, they distort capital markets, and they certainly have a big on-ground impact. And in my view, once they get to a certain scale, we should kick over into another type of analytical framework that ensures that we're taking a 40-year or a 50-year or a 100-year look at this thing and its wider implications. So we've seen massive distortions of labour markets in the whole of the north and the west of Australia through the LNG projects and gold mines and iron ore mines and so on. Houses on the Western Australian coast that suddenly became $2.5 million houses, where now the commodity prices have crashed, those companies have either pulled out or gone broke, and you've got whole municipalities that are now completely unviable. We've just had a haul road in the Northern Territory of 100 and something kilometres cleared to the coast without a permit. The company's now gone broke. The weeds are in there, the feral animals are in there, the devastation has happened, there's no one left to clean it up. And that's just, in my view, a complete failure of planning, approvals, regulation. And the courts have just looked at it, imposed a fine, and the fine worked out at $45 per kilometre of illegal road. And so the company can just put that in its budget. It's such a trivial expense that you could just budget for the fine. So I think it's terrible if the 12th richest country in the world can't put a governance framework around resources projects. I've no idea how Laos or Cambodia or Myanmar, let alone Indonesia, is going to do it. So to me, that's where we really need to get imaginative. But if we shut down the civil society avenues, they've been the most effective ones in Australia. The Adani coal mine has been held up by 2 claims in courts from tiny little local environment groups of 20 people, challenging the minister's process, and each time they were found to be correct. And the minister had acted illegally.
Can I just make one other point? I mean, I think there are cultural issues too. As a civil servant, I mean, I hated freedom of information. I mean, it creates problems. It delays time, and so you need a cultural change so that civil servants, as well as the politicians, are open to more open analysis. I mean, there is the other side of it, that openness can lead to paralysis. I mean, infrastructure projects do need to be driven forward, following good analysis. We've got a case in Britain now of London airports. We do need more capacity in London airports, and there's been great openness, but government is completely paralysed because they don't know what to do because of the opposition to any scheme that comes up. So it's not straightforward, but I do think that more openness on balance is needed, and we'll get better decisions.
That's a fascinating and disquieting, I think, insight from you, Andrew, about the draft legislation seeking to ban demonstrations. It's very interesting to see how that does. I'd just like to quickly follow up that question with a related point. I think we've established already that energy development issues are not only technological but profoundly political in nature, and those are where the real challenges lie. Technologies always improve and enhance people's lives over time. Is there a direction of travel in the case of governance or policy? So this point about accountability and openness is very, very important. We live in an age of transparency, increasingly moving towards a position where there's a presumption of transparency, that not being transparent or maintaining confidentiality in government or business is something that must be justified rather than assumed to be legitimate. Of course, the technologies around us enhance transparency all the time. We all have these computers in our pockets now that take photographs and can beam information anywhere in the world with nobody's notice. The march of transparency, the accountability that must bring, not only in Britain and the lessons of the Pegau Dam and the Free Movement Act and so on has followed. What about the experience of the countries in the region itself? Can one be optimistic that in the long term, how one defines that, we will get, just by force of irresistible mobilization of civil society and the technologies that mobilize and empower them, a steadily greater degree of accountability over time on energy issues?
I think if we talk about this issue of accountability, I think we cannot rely entirely on one specific actors, either civil society or government, but I think we have to try to create a bundle of powers that works beyond levels and interconnects all the forces in each different levels across the different groups, so that, I mean, from our work in Myanmar, for instance, there is a great divide between government and civil society. So in order to make accountability works, then the question is, how are you going to do that? Because civil society alone cannot change government decision, especially if you cannot enter into the government system in a formal way. So I think accountability has to come also from the people. And I think going back to the case of Myanmar, for instance, if you look at this Nyut Son Dam, this large hydropower dams which is pushed by the Chinese government to be built in Myanmar a couple of years ago, and now it's back on the political agenda once again. But when we look at how the civil society and local community was able to create a widespread protest that pushed even the military government at that time to postpone the dam, and I think there's a great learning value in it, of what people powers can make things possible.
Yes, well, in Indonesia's case, and in relation to transparency, and then will lead to accountability, the case of Red Plus initiative program, when it comes to basically pushing the government of Indonesia, particularly the Ministry of Forestry, to basically publish the maps. Not only the map, but also how many concessions are basically now still pending and already been awarded, and who are going to be given concession in the coming time. But there was a very difficult process before it was done, and the civil society, together with the academic community and also at the time international community, basically kept pushing the government to do so. And this was started in 2010. And at that time, President Yudhoyono was very known to be very responsive to the ideas of civil society and international community, and also President Yudhoyono has the presidential unit for monitoring and delivery for all the ministers. So basically, it helped by the how do you call it, maverick political high-rank actors within the government to push from inside the government of transparency together with the civil society from the outside. And that's resulted in a very progressive idea or policy called One Map initiative, which is still going on now, albeit very slowly. But actually, it was very progressive at the time, and then the government changed, and then all the actors which were basically pushing from inside the government changed. So the outsider, which are academic community and civil society, have almost no longer political ally from within the government to push this forward. So hopefully this will be continued, but transparency is very important because one of the greatest challenges in developing whether it's renewable energy or sustainable forest management is the overlapping concessions of land. And unless we have one map system in Indonesia and full transparency, then we will not be able to develop what we want to achieve with 23% renewable share within the energy mix. Thank you.
Just a quick addition. I think for accountability to work, you need multiple instruments. You need the rule of law, you need parliamentarians who are doing a decent job, you need a free press, you need NGOs who are working, and you need an anti-corruption instrument, which is pretty active in Indonesia, actually. It's the most impressive of the anti-corruption commissions I've come across, much better, for example, than in India, which is the other large country I know.
Yeah, so was there a question?
I had a quick question for Sir Tem, I guess. I work as a natural resource management consultant, and I wonder when you're writing up this case study about how if there are aspects of your insider information that you weren't allowed to publish, or how you got around that, as having access to all of this inside information and whatever your contractual sort of constraints were, and how once you've left that position, you're able to write about some of these things.
Well, actually, I was given exceptional access. We have a rule in Britain, I think it's a 30-year rule for access to these sort of materials, and I got access to the materials in a short period of that. The reason was that the current permanent secretary, he wanted the lesson of Per Gao to be revealed. So I got access to all of the aid agency papers. The only people who refused me access were the Ministry of Defence people. They were very worried about the material on the arms deal. But I actually knew about it. I was one of the very few civil servants who did know about it at the time. I'd seen it. And
yes, there's knowing, but there's being allowed to reveal, and systems are
yeah.
very reluctant to write about failure.
I did have to show my book in draft to the Cabinet Office,
Okay.
and the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office wanted that section taken out, and I refused to take it out, and they gave way. They didn't know how I got the material. Well, first of all, I remembered it, but I also found a file, the Foreign Office file, that had all the material. The Ministry of Defence denied that it existed. They said that these memos don't exist. I said, yeah, they do. I've got them. So it's quite an interesting freedom of information sort of. Sorry, I sought this material through freedom of information. They said it didn't exist, but it did. I think I was very lucky, actually. I got material which normally you simply wouldn't. An NGO, unfortunately, would not have been able to get this material. It's a tribute to the current Permanent Secretary that he was willing to allow me to have all these. I mean, there were 50 files. I mean, it's absolutely massive.
I can envisage a special edition of Yes Minister.
Yeah, it wasn't quite like that, actually, because my minister was a lady called Linda Chalker, Baroness Chalker. She supported me, actually. So it wasn't a question of, there were aspects of it. I'd like to do a show. It'd make a great movie, actually.
Like out of the musical.
Yeah.
Time for one more quick question.
Yeah.
There's been a very interesting discussion after the interesting panels, and this is picking up on the last couple of questions and the sort of the standard response that you get in hundreds of reports and documents looking at similar sort of cases and scandals of always there needs to be more democratic accountability and transparency. We've been hearing that for years and years. But I wonder, looking at Southeast Asia right now, and apart from possibly Myanmar, there seems to be a move away from democracy to more authoritarian states, and I could run them off, but won't bother because you're all aware of them. But linking with Sir Tim's presentation on the Pergao Dam, which is a well studied case now, thanks to Tim's work and the book and World Development Movement's work. And at the time of the Pergao Dam, or post-Pergao Dam, there were quite a few other cases of British arms raid or quite underhand arms dealings, which haven't really got into the public sphere. And I can remember looking at some of their reports, looking at Qatar and various other Middle Eastern countries, and down in the kind of footnotes of their report, which I'm not sure is even online now, might even been buried, there was this case that I've looked into in northeast Thailand, a project that was called the Green Isan project, around the same time as the Pergao, preceding perhaps a little bit, that was basically very similar. It was a large scale, it wasn't a hydropower, it was a large scale water transfer project across the northeast that was going to take water out of the Mekong and distribute it across the northeast, the poor and arid northeast. And the same kind of actors were involved. The military were involved. There was the chance for the UK to sell large amounts of arms to Thailand, which was on the hunt for arms at the time as their military and the economy was expanding. There was civil servants, there were corporate Bywater and various other UK corporations involved. Very similar, but it's never got into the public sphere. I've written a little bit about it, but I don't have privileged access like Sir Tim. So most of the documentation is still hidden. Maybe you have to wait for 30 years or 30 years after to get some of this information. But my point is that there are lots of other very similar, but this is the UK, supposedly an advanced democracy where all this information is hidden. In Thailand, forget it, because Thailand, and part of it wasn't just military to military, it was monarchy to monarchy. Well, you can dig a little bit about the UK monarchy, but as soon as you dig a bit about the Thai monarchy, you step foot there, you're put into jail. Not for a couple of years. People are being put into jail for 30, 40 years for a few tweets or a few Facebook likes. How does this run against this continual, we need more transparency and democracy? So I open us up to the panel for the remaining time to look more at empirical reality of what's happening in the region as opposed to normative prescriptions.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. But there'll be ample time in the next 2 or 3 days to all be circulating and around this wonderful space for interested people to raise issues like this. Unless there are any final comments on what we've just heard now.
I think that is history, actually. I don't actually believe it's happening now. They were so burnt. British aid was so burnt by the Pergao that, for example, aid is all now completely untied. So you don't have this opportunity for...
Yeah, well, I wasn't thinking so much of UK's aid. I was thinking with, as we've talked about, there's huge amounts of new projects coming on, but not UK to Southeast Asia, but China to Southeast Asia, Malaysia to Southeast Asia, Thailand to Laos, Thailand to...
that's another...
But what does that say to Southeast Asia?
Let's circulate over coffee and share views on all these things. But I hope now you'll be able to join me in thanking our distinguished panelists.
I haven't even checked it.
I'm not sure, but I think